this is really one of the things I enjoy the most, because I look at the user groups as Apple's lifeline out to the people who are experiencing our products. And if you think about what Apple's vision is, which is to do nothing less than change the world, to do that one person at a time, and to accomplish that by fundamentally changing the way people work and think and communicate and learn, nothing is more important than the using experience. And it's the using experience that we have decided is the epicenter of everything that Apple wants to be respected for. So this really, I think, gives you some context to look at why user groups as a network are so terribly important. It's very difficult as our products become more complex, as we get a wider range of products in our line, to be able to get all of the information out to the end users who are going to be using these products, so that they can really enjoy the very best of what our products have to offer, unless there are some support lines that go out there. Now, some of those support lines Apple can provide. Others can be provided by third-party groups like our resellers. But I think that there's nothing like having a relationship, because this really is an industry of relationships, having a relationship with people who are actually enjoying what they're doing with the products, not just trying to sell the products, but are actually enjoying using the products along with you. And that, I believe, is one of the reasons why Apple is as successful as it is because what all of you have done. So I think it's very appropriate to thank the Advisory Council, and then to ask you to take those thanks out to all of the groups that you represent, because I want everyone who is involved with an Apple user group to know that I consider what you do very important. I want to personally extend my thanks, and to say that the success of Apple in the future is going to be as dependent on what you will do as what you've already done so far. Let me give you sort of a perspective of what I think is going on in the personal computer industry, and particularly as it relates to Apple. First of all, the personal computer industry has been and will continue to go through tremendous change. There's not going to be any slowdown in the technology that we can foresee in the future. The number of new ways that the technology can be used is only going to increase, I believe. So it means for the user who is out there trying to make decisions as to what products they should buy, whether it's peripheral products or upgrading their CPUs or software products, or trying to figure out how they're going to fit in with other computers from other vendors, the questions are only going to be more difficult to answer. And it means that we have to have a way of getting that information out. When Apple was founded back in 1977, the dealer network was created. And the dealer network was made up largely of people who knew something about computers, and they were selling to people who knew something about computers. Today, we know that the large majority of our products are going to people who are interested in what the computers can do for them, but they may not be computer experts. And they may not even have any particular interest to become computer experts. And yet the products are becoming more sophisticated, and they're going through this rapid change. I hope to see some new networks that will be created over the next several years. For example, I would love to see a network of consultants emerge in the industry, people who can charge a fee for service, that can go out and work with users. Some may be corporate users, some may be educational users, some may be individual users. But the point is to have an infrastructure out there where entrepreneurs, many of whom will probably come out of user clubs, will decide that they want to make Apple more than just something that they do in their free time. They'd like to make Apple something that they could do as a vocation. And we're trying to build a company which is relatively small, which is dependent upon third-party relationships. So I would love to see a network of consultants emerge, where Apple could help train these consultants, help provide materials so they would be informed about our products, but then they could go out and define what areas that they wanted to specialize in, and you might end up with several thousand of consultants across the United States. And since this is a global industry, I would love to see this, go right across Canada and Europe and other parts of the world. I also would love to see a network of training experts emerge, people who can go out and train. So they may, in some cases, be similar to consultants. In other cases, they may be slightly different. For example, the consultants might actually work with things like integrating systems together, and how do you link together several Macintoshes, or how do you connect Apple II GSs with Macintoshes in a mixed environment, or how do you put on peripheral products, or how do you connect up to IBM compatible computers with Apple computers, or things of this nature. Or they might work in trying to help a customer or a client learn how to use a particular application, whereas a training person would actually go in and do the training work, and they wouldn't be installing equipment, but they would be teaching people how to use products that were coming from Apple, or products that were coming from third parties, and showing them how to use things, recognizing that the people they might be training might not know very much about computers to start with. So it could be some fairly basic level type stuff. But one of the big problems you have where I sit is getting isolated and not being in touch with everything that's going on. So on the one hand, I can talk to you about the macro vision, but you can talk to me about what's actually happening, what's happening with the experiences of the people who are seeing Apple from the standpoint of the products and services which they receive. And there is nothing more valuable for me than to get that input firsthand. And I want to thank you for the time that you invest, because I know you take a lot of time out of your personal lives. It costs you money to do this, and it means a lot to the success of Apple, and it means a lot to the success of John Sculley, so thank you. Why don't we open it up now for some questions that you have.
I speak from the background of both an Apple II and a Macintosh user group, and we discuss this among the people that are familiar with both Apple II and Macintosh. And what we've seen is when the Lisa and the Macintosh came out in 83, 84, we saw a lot of the technical people that were working on Apple II, the developers, the real knowledgeable people, immediately migrate over to the Macintosh. Well, then over the 5-year period since the Mac has come out, we're starting to see more and more of the intermediate level people move from the Apple II. The ones that have been supporting the new users and whatnot are moving now to the Macintosh. And what we have seen from Apple is a continued commitment, or said in marketing that they're committed to the Apple II line. But our question is, how can you continue to support for this line when your grassroots support is leaving for the Macintosh, as well as even the dealers are moving toward the Macintosh? It seems like it's getting to the point where people really question whether to go with the Apple II, because the support is all moving toward the Macintosh.
Well, I think that's a very good question, and it's one which we think about a lot. I think it would be a mistake to consciously hold down the growth of any product just because you thought that there was a policy reason why you ought to do it. So that my feeling is that we have to let the Macintosh grow as fast as it's capable of growing, and we have to let the Apple II grow as fast as it is capable of growing. What we have seen, particularly over the last year, Andy, is that there are a lot of very loyal enthusiasts out there who don't want to see the Apple II go away. We had about 10,000 people at Apple Fest in Boston last spring, a year ago. We had about twice that number in San Francisco at Apple Fest, and this is an Apple II event. And I talked to a large number of them, and the one clear message that they gave me is, don't abandon the Apple II. That we know the Macintosh has more advanced technology in many ways, but there are a lot of us out there who really like what the Apple II does, and we want to continue to have support. The difficult task is that we have to find ways that third parties can continue to support the Apple II and make money in the process. And the introduction of the Apple II GSOS operating system, I think, is going to help a lot, because that's an operating system that in many ways has a lot of the characteristics of the Macintosh operating system. So it's got very sophisticated stereo sound, it's got very high quality graphics, it's got color, and yet it's got the compatibility with the Apple II software base that we've had in the past. So my sense is that that's going to be important. Moving the Apple II over to 3.5-inch media was a very controversial decision. A lot of people were worried about what that would do, because there was so much media on the Apple II on the 5.25-inch format. And yet we felt we had to proactively begin the transition, because we knew that we weren't going to get developers to want to write more sophisticated applications, unless we gave them a chance to write on something that had a larger disk capacity to it. So I think these kinds of decisions have been important ones, occasionally somewhat controversial. And I think I'd sort of like to hear maybe from the Advisory Council what ideas all of you have that we can do to keep the Apple II going, recognizing that the real momentum in the industry is towards 32-bit processors, and we're seeing the Macintosh have extraordinary growth, and in many cases starting to move into some of the market segments where the Apple II had once been very successful. Keep in mind that the Apple II was a general purpose computer 4 or 5 years ago, so by definition it was going to bump up against Macintosh or IBM PCs or other computers at some point in time. Well, I'd much rather have somebody who wasn't going to buy an Apple II buy a Macintosh than go buy an IBM PC compatible. So that's sort of the perspective we've used on it. But I'd really like some input from the Advisory Council on what you all think.
We're wondering what Apple is coming out with the new technology, what's happening there. What can we tell people who are not really interested, they don't have the support or the allegiance to the computer or the company that we had originally. They would just want to get the job done. How can we respond to them? What is Apple doing to address those issues?
Well, I think the best way to respond to those people is to remind them that after they have purchased any computer system, that they don't get their return on investment, and the return on investment may be in the form of increased productivity if they're a business person, small or large business, or it may be the return on enjoyment that they get from the individual user purchasing it. But you don't get any of that unless the using experience is really great. And I believe that we have not done a good enough job at Apple in telling the story that it's not just technical features that make a computer successful. It's the fact that you have to sit down and get behind it and drive it. And perhaps the best way to explain that to somebody is to walk into an Apple user group meeting and set up a competitive machine. Set up the most advanced competitive machine. Take an IBM PC compatible with a 386 processor, put a lot of memory on it, put Windows on it, put a VGA card on it, put whatever you think is appropriate on it, and then sit somebody down and let them boot the system and drive it for 45 minutes. And then take a Macintosh, any Macintosh, not just the highest end Macintosh that we have, but any Macintosh, Macintosh Plus or Macintosh SE or SE30 or the Apple, the Macintosh 2, and let them drive that for 45 minutes. And I think the point there is that there has to be a reason why, when we've gone out and done surveys, we find that the average IBM compatible user uses their computer about half an hour a day and uses less than 2 applications in total, in terms of their total knowledge, and why the average Macintosh user is up to almost 6 applications now, and they are able to spend about 2.5 to 3 hours a day on their Macintosh. Why are they doing that? So I believe that that's probably the best context to answer the question. Then, in terms of judging what Apple is doing from a technical standpoint, judge it from the vantage point of the user's experience. What we're trying to do is, as the world gets more complex with computer technology, we're trying to keep things simpler. And we can do that because we focus on a lot of things which are in our control. So we can leverage our strengths. We can spend time in seeing how the pieces integrate well with each other. Our competitors, by necessity, can go out and say, all right, we will copy the features that Apple has, and maybe we'll add a few that Apple doesn't have. But they essentially have to bolt together things that come from a variety of different sources. And by definition, they're going to have to average to the lowest common denominator, because they've got to be able to reach out to the broadest number of vendor products that follow their particular technology. That is only going to become a bigger advantage, I believe, for Apple over time, as things become more complex. And so a lot of our technology is invested in things that aren't particularly flashy or particularly glamorous, but they mean a lot, I think, for the user when they're sitting down and using their computer. Now, from a technology standpoint, the kinds of things which we're focusing on are to take the Macintosh product line and to essentially move as many people as we can to the 68030 processor family. It's not that the software that you have today won't run on the 68000 or the 68020. So this is not a heart transplant conversion that the DOS world had to go through by any stretch of the imagination. But we're trying to anticipate the more powerful system software that we'll have at the operating system level in the future, that you will not be able to experience the full capabilities of it unless you have the memory management unit, which is built into the 68030 processor. So yes, you will have compatibility. So you haven't lost your investment if you buy something less than a 68030 platform machine. But if you want to experience all the things we're going to do in the future, you're going to want to have that. We're trying to build out the range of the Macintosh family because we are now reaching a much broader group of market segments than we ever did in the past. When we entered business just a few years ago, we came in through the back door into essentially desktop publishing applications. Once we got in, people discovered that the Macintosh could be used for a lot more things. So now one of our fastest growing markets is engineering and technical workstation applications. We're moving into legal markets, medical markets. We're moving into just a group of market segments that have required that we have hardware platforms that are that really give the end user a freedom of choice to decide what configuration makes the most sense to them. So that isn't always glamorous, but it's important from the user standpoint. The third thing I would say is that there isn't anything that we have seen that's been introduced by any competitor that we believe is going to put Apple with the Macintosh technology at a disadvantage in the early 1990s. We're essentially trying to get ready for the early 1990s because we believe that the best years for the Macintosh technology are going to be in the 1990s. And it means the right hardware platforms, it means the right system software, it means the right development tools like end-user programming tools. It means encouraging application developers to take advantage of these platforms, such as the multimedia technology that I showed at my Macworld keynote recently. All of these things we think are going to be extremely important in the early 1990s. So what we're doing may not seem glamorous, that we don't come out and announce a brand new computer and therefore obsolete the computers we had before. We used to do that and people got mad at us. Now they're getting mad at us because we don't do it. So my sense is that you have to sort of strike a balance, and we're trying to strike a balance that will only make the Macintosh worth more in the future. But I can assure, I think, every user across the world that they are not going to be at a disadvantage versus what competitors will be offering as we go out into the 1990s. In the winter of 1989, we will introduce a new Macintosh. And this will be one that will be essentially building off of the great success that we've had with the Macintosh 2. So this will have a 68030 processor. It will have a new bus architecture to it, but it will be a compact Macintosh in terms of a small footprint. And this means that you will trade off 3 slots, for size, but you'll pick up, performance because it has the 68030 processor in it. Now, this Macintosh, I think, is going to be extremely successful because it's the most versatile one that we've ever introduced, meaning that it can be configured in more ways than any other Macintosh we've ever offered. As an example, it not only has a small footprint, but it's introduced with a full-page display, which can sit on top of that CPU, which means that it's not much bigger than we've become accustomed with the compact line of SE and Mac Pluses. The CPU can be turned on its side, and it can sit next to a large 21-inch monitor. You can drive a color monitor, as well as a black and white monitor. You can take all of the cards that the Apple II or the Macintosh 2 or the Macintosh 2X have. And it's a product which can do something that I think is going to be very important to a graphic artist, to power users who have to work with spreadsheets a lot, to engineers who have to do CAD drawings, let's say, on the one hand, but also have to turn those into reports or proposals. And that is the support of 2 displays at the same time. Now, one of the subtleties of the way that the Macintosh has been architected is that we can support more than a single monitor at the same time. So I think this particular product, which is going to be called the Macintosh 2CX, is that some of the most powerful uses of this computer are going to be used with 2 displays, so that someone will have a full-page display on one side, and they'll have the CPU in the center, and then next to it they'll have maybe a color monitor, or they might have a 21-inch display, so that if you were working with a spreadsheet, you'd have a large spreadsheet model on your large display, and then you'd be able to cut and paste into a report and see the full report. If you were working as a graphic artist, it might be just the reverse. You might have some of your tools over on the smaller display, and you might be compositing on the large display. If you're an engineer, you might be using your CAD tools or other engineering applications on the large display and preparing your report on the smaller display. If you are a clerical worker, a secretary, or if you're a manager in an organization, large or small, forms, I think, are going to become increasingly important. So having a small footprint product with a full-page display with one monitor, so you can see the entire form, I think is going to be very important. So, is that innovation in a revolutionary sense, or is that innovation in an evolutionary sense? Well, it's going to be revolutionary from the standpoint of the way that you use the product. But it's going to be evolutionary from the standpoint that it's the same architecture, it's building off of the strengths that we've had before, it's learning the lessons of the power of the Mac 2, but it's learning the lessons of the compactness of the SE. So I think that we have to strike this balance between, where do you revolutionize and where do you evolutionize? And this is a very good example of a product that I think is going to capture the imagination of a lot of people and say, wow, this is exciting. And people will call it revolutionary, but in truth, it's really very evolutionary. I would like to see ways that there were even better relationships between user groups and Apple people. Ellen Leonce and her team, in my opinion, have done an absolutely extraordinary job of building the bridges with the user groups and expanding user groups into areas that we never had user groups before. But that's a relatively small number of people. I would love to see more contact with our field people with user groups, field people attending user group meetings. In the past, there's often been an adversarial relationship between resellers and user groups. This makes no sense to me at all. I mean, if I were a reseller, I would be out wrapping my arms around all of you because you would help me, I think. So I think we've got to find ways to get our resellers to understand that user groups are a wonderful resource, and resellers ought to be helping them, not trying to, be aloof. So I think there's some things we can do, and we'll try to work hard at that over the coming year.